Hello and welcome to the 77% show. This week we are in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, where since June, this city and indeed the rest of the country has been turned into a political stage. There have been major protests by young people and some even lost their lives. More coming up on this very special edition show. I'm Edith Kimani. Now, if you've seen any images from Kenya lately, you may notice that today is a very quiet day here in Nairobi. There are no chanting crowds, mercifully, no tear gas. But since mid-June, young Kenyans have been gathering on these streets, in town halls and also online. Now, initially, the mostly Gen Z protesters wanted a controversial finance bill that would increase taxes in the country to be dropped. But now, those protests, like others in Africa, are about much more than a single issue. Here's what's coming up. We'll find out what sparked Kenya's nationwide protests. We'll look at previous youth protests from other parts of the continent. And we'll try to find out where all this could be heading. But before we go any further, let's take a look at what's happened until now.
This is uptown Nairobi, and on a normal day it will be traffic congestion on the road. But right now the road is full of young people who have been protesting a controversial finance bill.
Police using what I would consider to be excessive force. At the moment we've just had to pull back. We had seen somebody get injured just beyond the road there.
It started out as peaceful protests. Young Kenyans draped in flags calling for Kenya's parliament to reject a finance bill that many felt imposed exorbitantly high taxes on an already squeezed Kenyan population.
We're already paying taxes, and the little that we are paying, they're not doing much with it.
Our parents are suffering. We are suffering. Where should we go? If I never came here, things would have gotten out of hand. So I must be here so that I'll be heard, and my voice will be heard by other Kenyans.
The so-called Gen Z protesters were soon met with tear gas, water cannons, arrests and even live bullets. The second day of protests ended in the deaths of 29-year-old Rex Masai, allegedly shot in the evening of the protest, and 21-year-old Evans Kiratu, who died after he was hit by a tear gas canister. Yet that was only the start. On June 25th, the protest went nationwide. In Nairobi, the focus was on Parliament, and after MPs voted for the adoption of the finance bill, protesters stormed the National Assembly, with police opening fire on them.
This was one of the walls from Parliament that was actually brought down by the protesters. There's blood all over. There's a truck on this other side that has been burnt, belonged to the police.
Since the beginning of the protests, over 50 people lost their lives and many more were injured. But that did not deter people. They organised blood donations, raised money to foot hospital bills, and organised a concert in remembrance of the victims.
For the longest time, leadership in Africa has been in the hands of the old and the elite and the rich thugs. But now people are saying, no, wait a minute, we are the majority in the continent. We are the ones who don't have jobs. We're the ones there in the Mediterranean Sea trying to go abroad. So the young people are saying, you know what, we want to fight for our country instead of dying in the high seas or going to do menial jobs in Europe.
In the weeks since, the protests have become more sparse.
Unlike the numbers we've witnessed in the previous weeks, today very few protesters have come out. In part due to the high number of security details. You can see behind me, they keep lobbying tear gas. It's all over the air.
With the heavy security presence, arrests and often even abductions by plain-clothed officers, the protesters may not all be in the streets, but the conversations continue on X spaces, offline and through courts and petitions.
This is it, the political awakening. Everyone is aware. We are not following politicians around taking pictures and, we are asking them the real questions. And so many people are saying this has died, but it's actually the beginning.
And the government's response? Kenya's president has sent the finance bill back to Parliament and dismissed his entire cabinet. He has attempted to dialogue with the protesters, but they say his actions don't show true will.
Now, it's a little eerie to be walking on these streets because this was a site of some of the worst skirmishes during the Nairobi protests. Now, the country's parliament is just around the corner, and on June 25th, young people were able to breach the barriers there and gain entry. Now, of course, a lot of people were injured and many more also lost their lives. Now, we invited young people to discuss this issue and to tell us why exactly they were out on the streets. And it turns out that they were more interested in talking about how security personnel dealt with the protesters. Watch. Hello and welcome back to the 77% Street Debate. My name is Edith Kimani and this week we are back in Kenya's capital of Nairobi. But we're here to ask, are protests the only way for Kenyans to get their voices heard? And what next for the young people of this movement? Who better to answer that question than the actual members of the movement? Shakira, let's start with you because you stood up to a police officer and you said, "You're not taking me anywhere, I'm standing up for my rights." Why were you so angry that day?
That was the second day of the protests, and on the first day I had been arrested. I wouldn't even use the term arrested because I was ambushed by plainclothes officers and they threw me into a vehicle, they harassed me, they beat me and they took me to Central Police and we were detained among other protesters until 8 p.m. So I didn't understand why the people's demands and had to be met with such brutality. So I was like, if this moment ever happens to me again, I have to be able to speak up for myself. And to be honest, I was scared. But my anger and frustration superseded my fear at that point.
All right, so Shakira's anger superseding her fear. Mohammed, you are a journalist, a communicator, but very much also involved in these protests. So I did ask the question, what sparked the protest? Because, I mean, Kenyans have been known to protest for a while, but not like this, not at this scale.
Kenya has come to the brink of revolution so many times. But
revolution, that's a very strong word.
It is a very strong word. I think we can go back all the way to the 90s when we had the multi-party, when we were fighting for multi-party democracy in this country. 2002, when all of us were at Uhuru Park and saying, yote wezekana bila Moi. There's one uniform factor throughout, and that is politicians always come in and hijack the movements and make it about themselves. So what's different this time round, I think the people, they got tired of that.
So then what is the message now? Because at the beginning it was very clear, right? Reject the finance bill. And I want to speak to some people who participated in the protest. Did that involve burning buildings, looting businesses? Because this is also what the young people are being accused of.
Like the first day when Rex got shot, I was in the upper side, I was in CBD. At 4, all of us decided to go home because it's the end of the day, nighttime was coming. The streets were generally not going to be safe. People left, but then the minute you're coming to downtown, you're being told, oh, the people who were here, there were goons, people's businesses were ransacked, people were attacked. Most of the protesters were trying to go home. All of us wanted to go home. We were tired.
Let me bring in Charles Owino, who you might recognize as a former spokesperson for the police. Based on your own assessment and observation, how would you rate the behavior of police towards the protesters in those early days?
There's sometimes a big conflict that police find themselves in because, as you heard the young man talk, most of these issues are political problems between the public and politicians. Police officers come in to enforce laws and regulations of the land. Well, our current constitution is a bit more vibrant, and Article 37 of the constitution provides that you can demonstrate, you can assemble, you can picket, you can present petitions to authorities peaceably and unarmed.
Who do the police respond and serve? Do they consider us first or the politicians?
The police considers the nation, every one of you. Because, for example, she's a businesswoman. If you break into her shop, what happens to her? So from where I sit, I don't want to defend anybody, but what I'm saying is, can we follow the law?
Okay, let me hear from some people here because I'm seeing the hands coming up.
If we're being honest to ourselves, the default position of the police of this country since independence has always been violence. Now, some of the people who came out during these protests, they're kids who are from middle-class families. Police brutality for them, it's things they see on TV or they read on the papers. If you go to these low-income or these neighborhoods, these informal settlements, the Madares, the Kibras, this is their daily reality. Brothers, sons, killed without any due process.
So we have somebody here from the Law Society of Kenya. What does the law say about peaceful protests and were the police on the right? Because we saw images of people holding just the flag and yet they're being sprayed with water cannon.
The unfortunate thing that we have witnessed in this country is the anarchy perpetrated by the state. And I will say this because we saw a court in Malindi issue an order directing that the police officers should not use lethal weapons, they should not use force, they should not use water cannons. And it was clearly directed to the Inspector General of Police to ensure that they provide that command. The following day, there was a protest organized in the various cities, and we could witness the police were in total violation of that order.
I'm going to give Mr. Owino a chance to respond to that, and then I want us to move away from the issue of police, yeah?
When you bar the police from using the tools required for their trade.
You mean live ammunition?
Even live ammunition. Yes, I don't want to lie. I want to be very honest.
Yeah.
Even live ammunition is a tool of trade for the police. We have had cases of terrorism here, people coming with bombs and firearms. So what I'm saying is that when it comes to tear gas, the court trying to stop the police from using tear gas or using baton or even using his gun is misplaced in the sense that it is equivalent to telling the police, stay at the police station, let us protest.
The president has already made some concessions, fired nearly his entire cabinet. He's now reappointed some people, or at least nominated them. How do you feel about that? Do you feel like the president is listening to the demands of the youth?
Honestly, I don't think he is. Because if you see the reshuffle, it's like he just switched positions, you know? It's like this person was here, come, stay here, you go, stay here. Just to show people, it's like he's playing around with people's mind, like I've done something.
Okay. So what are the real issues? Let's come back to that.
It's evident that when we say Ruto must go, we don't specifically refer to Ruto, but the entire government that is backing him up. They've been given a chance time and time again, because these are politicians I've heard about since I was a little girl. So I think it's just time it's like deconstructing everything and start afresh from a new foundation.
So what are the solutions?
I'm going to plead with the youth. My children go to school in Nairobi. I work in Nairobi. That means my children will not go to school, I will not go to work, and I am a single mother of 3 children. Kindly, as a human being, I hope that this protest can take a better route. Mm-hmm.
So while you support the movement, you don't want loss of business, you don't want loss of life. Okay, yes. Understood. Let me hear some more points.
My solution is simple.
Yeah.
The young people, you are the majority. Stop tribalism.
We don't have tribalism.
We are not tribalists.
Excuse me. I don't say you are a tribalist. I say we have been practicing tribalism. Your generation should stop. I want to see an election where you are going to elect people based on the policies that they want to sell to you. Because currently...
I think that's a fair point. And finally, I'd like to hear from you, Moha. Let's close this with you.
Yes. As civilians, we're going to take our civic duty very seriously from now on. The other day on Twitter, we had 2 different simultaneous Twitter spaces on Wednesday. Well, one group was teaching people about the bills that are being tabled in Parliament, and the other group was teaching people, it's a group of young lawyers who are teaching people about the Katiba, the Constitution. We're reaching a point where we're going to make life very uncomfortable for politicians, and in a non-violent way.
Okay.
Let me just clarify that.
So we have to wrap there because of the time, but I did ask a question, what next? And I think the answer has been very clear here, that even if it's not on the streets, it's going to be somewhere online or perhaps at a debate like this, right? So I thank you all for participating. I did read somewhere that these protests were not so much anti-government, but pro-good governance. And I think this debate here has clearly illustrated that. Thank you all for watching. Thank you so much to everyone who took part in that debate. Now, the longer version is available on YouTube. And just for your information, we had initially approached several politicians, MPs, to try to understand how they see their role in all of these political changes. But they weren't able to join our debate. So much like here in Kenya, Nigerian youth were at the center of one of the largest protest movements in Africa, EndSARS. Can you believe that it's already been 4 years? So let's take a look back at what the protests were all about.
Thousands had gathered to peacefully demonstrate against rising cases of police brutality.
I know that the protests were largely peaceful because I was there reporting.
But that evening, the protest songs in Lagos would turn into cries for help. And the same place where people called for their rights to be upheld would be the same place they were killed. It all started on the 3rd of October. Policemen from the Special Anti-Robbery Squad Unit, better known as SARS, allegedly killed a young man in southern Delta State and took away his car. As a video of the deadly assault leaked online, hundreds of young people took to social media to vent and share their own SARS experiences, all of which were bad. SARS was initially formed in 1992 to tackle armed robbery in the country, but the unit grew into a notorious force, popular for extorting and abusing young Nigerians. By October 8th, the online anger against SARS had grown so much that it spilled into the streets nationwide. In Lagos, protesters mounted roadblocks and shut down traffic. Thousands gathered at the Lekki toll gate, a major highway in a rich area of the city. This would come to be the main demonstration point. Their demands were simple. They wanted SARS banned, bad officials prosecuted, and for victims to be compensated. But they were also advocating for the officials themselves. They wanted them to be mentally evaluated and for their salaries to be increased so that they would have fewer reasons to extort. On the 11th, as the protests gained momentum, the Nigerian police finally scrapped SARS.
The Special Anti-Robbery Squad of the Nigerian Police, otherwise known as SARS, is hereby dissolved.
But people weren't buying it. This wasn't the first time the police was claiming to reform SARS. By then, the demonstrations had become more of a movement anyways, and people were demanding not just for police reforms, but for better governance.
It's not a SARS anymore. It's not a SARS anymore. There is hunger in the land. Economy is poor. There is no light.
On Monday, the 19th, Lagos Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu formed a judicial panel to look into SARS abuses. But the protests continued still. And save for some cases of police crackdowns, they were largely peaceful, although criminal elements have started to infiltrate. As thousands of protesters gathered again at Lekki Tollgate on Tuesday, October 20th, they noticed that things were different. People told me that they saw tollgate staff removing CCTV cameras installed in the area, and that as evening fell, the street lights wouldn't come on, leaving the place completely dark. At around 4 p.m., Governor Sanwo-Olu imposed a curfew, trying to instill order, but many protesters at the tollgate remained there. Then, at around 7, men of the Nigerian army rolled in on several vans and started to shoot at the unarmed demonstrators.
They are shooting at us! They are shooting!
Eyewitnesses told me they counted several bodies that night, taken away by the army. But it wasn't over. As word of the killings traveled, angry mobs took to the streets, looting shops, burning buildings, and attacking policemen. 12 people died, according to Amnesty International, and many more were injured. The Nigerian government has set up judicial panels to look into police violence, but denies the killings of October 20th.
Nigeria's youth took to the streets and successfully had the controversial SARS police unit disbanded. But at least 12 people died on that night of what is now known as the Lekki Tollgate massacre. So what happens during such protests, and why do the police or army often react this way against peaceful protesters? Well, we spoke to a security expert here in Kenya, and this is what he had to say.
It's the day of the protests. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of people stream into the streets. The organizers had notified the police, but the sheer numbers are overwhelming. So how to react?
The ideal scenario is that any unit that is tasked to manage within that area of jurisdiction would go in to protect those rioters, those protesters, to get to their end game, in which case, present a petition to either a power or an agent of their target, and in a way to influence action or to just basically spell out their grievances. And once that is done, then go back home peacefully and retire peacefully.
So the police are supposed to protect, especially in countries which guarantee the right to freedom of assembly. In other words, the right to protest.
But then we've also just seen where there are excesses on the part of the riots and where, as we know it, infiltrators come in to take advantage of sheer numbers. And that's where, again, the infrastructure that's supposed to be providing security have got to be very vigilant to single out these actors and to relevantly apply force to impede some of these actions and or to arrest them altogether.
What we've seen across the African continent, however, is that police are armed to their teeth. And in many cases, when the situation becomes more volatile, they fail to de-escalate. In Kenya's most recent protests, police used tear gas and water cannons to disperse even just a handful of people. And in footage that we filmed, officers used their firearms, even accidentally.
If you are to drag out a weapon and to shoot at whatever it is that is out there, there's got to be an existential threat to life. That is either the life of the operators themselves, of the security agencies, and or there's wanton destruction of property, and or there's a risk to, threat to life, especially on the part of the people that are being protected.
In preparation for the FIFA World Cup in South Africa in 2010, police and security forces got special training to prepare them to control the crowds of tourists and football fans that will descend on the country. For South Africa, which only emerged from the brutal apartheid era a few years back, it was a learning curve. They could not afford to endure visiting fans. So what needs to be changed? Better training, discipline, and more consequences for those who don't stick to the rules? What's clear is that the change needs to come from the top.
So we've now looked at Kenya, we've looked at Nigeria, but another country that saw a very prolonged youth uprising was South Africa. Their Fees Must Fall protests took place between 2015 to 2017, almost a decade ago. At that time, students were protesting the high cost of university fees. And because we wanted to find out what happens to movements when that initial wave of protest dies down, we asked some of those former students.
The reality is that society at the time saw us as hooligans, vandals, running around causing chaos.
I think that student movements get a bad rap, a really, really bad rap, because all that people see is the violence, but they don't know what had to happen in order to get to that stage.
In some universities, here we are really dealing with people who are very arrogant. People don't want to listen.
It's only now, in a post-Fees Must Fall reality, where the media, where academia itself is lauding Fees Must Fall as this, revolutionary moment in a post-democratic South Africa. But at the time of Fees Must Fall, we were very isolated, and we were treated as petulant children who didn't understand the reality of what we were talking about.
It's almost been a decade, a student movement fueled by the high cost of university fees and the sense that the education system was stuck in the apartheid and colonial past. Colonial structures were toppled under the hashtag Rhodes Must Fall, and the students demanded that university fees must fall so that education is not only accessible to the rich. The students occupied their campuses, but they were also met with force by police and the university's private security.
So at that moment, we took a decision. So because we called for ungovernable university, we took over from the management.
It's much harder to organize when there are private security with rifles guarding different buildings. It's much harder to organize when, even during meetings, police would be called.
And for a time, they shut down the campuses, putting enough pressure on universities to agree to some of their demands.
In principle, President Zuma agreed with us and called for free education, but now we needed now the state, how is going to be funded?
We know that free education never came. And so it was honestly just a tactic to demobilize us, and it worked very effectively.
9 years down the line, students with places at Africa's best universities still fear losing their spots due to outstanding debt. In 2024, over 1.9 million students applied for financial aid.
It just feels like every single generation is going to fight their best fight and then walk 2 steps forward, 10 steps back. And we keep advancing, we do, but at just an incredibly slow rate.
And what did they learn from it?
During Fees Must Fall, we were young, we were making things up as we went along.
It's one of the mistakes that we also made as young people during Fees Must Fall is that we also did not go out to our communities to involve them.
Organize, mobilize and organize, and elect members that you trust, that are vetted. Also, mobilization that is directly talking to the institution you're protesting.
My hope is that we as young Africans can revive the spirit of Pan-Africanist struggle, that we can support each other, as was the case in the 60s, in the 70s. There's a need for us to go back to our roots and to read and to learn and to speak to our elders. And so I'm very excited for what the future holds for young Africans who are taking their power back.
So, reflection, disappointments, but perhaps, as we just heard, hope. Well, we've come to the end of our show, but here in Kenya, the country's youth are still in the midst of things. We'll continue to bring you the latest developments, and you can also follow us on TikTok, we're of course on YouTube, and you can also find us on Instagram. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Edith Kimani. Goodbye.